Tolt, at 20 past midnight on a Thursday in November, Declan Osei came down the back stairwell of his office tower on Bay Street to retrieve a laptop he had left on his desk, and he stopped 3 steps from the bottom because someone was crying in the dark of the lobby. The sound was quiet, controlled, kind of crying a person does when they have taught themselves to be silent about it and have failed by a very small margin. He should have turned around. The building had security. The building had a night cleaning crew contracted through a company whose name he had approved on a purchase order 18 months ago and forgotten the next morning. Whoever was crying in his lobby at midnight was not his responsibility. Then the emergency stairwell light caught a reflection off the marble floor, and he saw her. She was on her knees beside the reception desk, with a rag in one hand and a spray bottle in the other. And the swell of her stomach was pressed against the edge of the desk in a way that made it obvious she had been kneeling too long and had not been able to find a comfortable position for some time. Her left hand, the one holding the rag, trembled in a small, steady rhythm, and when she shifted her weight to reach a spot she had missed, the sleeve of her gray uniform rode up past her wrist, and Declan saw the bruises. 4 oval marks on the inside of her forearm, the kind that fingers make. Yellowing underneath from an older set that had not finished healing before the new ones arrived. He almost went back up the stairs. He had spent 3 years not involving himself in other people's trouble because his own trouble had been large enough to fill every room he walked into, and he had learned somewhere in the long gray middle of grief that the fastest way to drown was to reach for someone else while you were still underwater. Then she turned her head to push a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist, and the light hit a small tattoo behind her left ear. A hummingbird, no larger than a thumbprint, bright green with a thread of gold along the wing. Declan felt the floor tilt beneath him. He knew that hummingbird. He had watched it being drawn in blue ballpoint pen on the back of a napkin at a Tim Hortons in Sudbury 26 years ago by a girl who was 14 years old and who had told him with the absolute certainty that only 14-year-olds possess that she was going to get it tattooed. The day she turned 16 and that nobody could stop her. He had told her it looked more like a dragonfly. She had thrown the napkin at his head. 2 weeks later, his mother had packed the car and driven them to Toronto without telling him until they were past Parry Sound that they were not going back. He had called twice from a payphone on Danforth Avenue. The second time, a man he did not recognize answered and told him the Fontaine family had moved, and he did not know where. 26 years. Sable Fontaine was on her knees in his lobby, cleaning his floors at midnight, pregnant and bruised and not looking up because someone had trained her not to look up. Declan backed into the stairwell before she could hear him. He climbed 9 floors to his office without the laptop and sat in his chair in the dark for a long time with his hands flat on the desk, the way he used to sit in the weeks after the funeral, when the silence in a room became something he could almost hear breathing. By 7 the next morning, he was in the kitchen of the house in Forest Hill that he had bought for Amara 4 years ago and had lived in alone for 3. The house was too large for one person. Amara had known that. She had filled it with noise and color and the particular chaos of a 3-year-old named Kaya, who believed that every cupboard in the kitchen was a hiding spot, and that being found was the best part of any game. The accident on the 401 had taken them both on a Sunday in February. Black ice. A transport truck. Declan had been in a meeting in Markham. He had not picked up the first call from the hospital because the meeting was running long and because he had assumed Amara was calling to ask him to pick up milk. He had not bought milk since. Constance Reel set a cup of coffee in front of him without asking, the way she had done every morning for 32 months. She was 64 and had been hired 2 weeks after the funeral by Declan's sister, who had correctly judged that Declan would not eat, sleep, or answer his phone unless someone was physically present in the house to make sure he did. Connie had arrived with a single suitcase and a look on her face that said she had buried people of her own and was not here to discuss it. She had not discussed it. Not once in 32 months. She had simply been in the kitchen every morning with coffee, and in the hallway every evening with a plate he sometimes ate from, and on the landing outside the door he never opened, where she dusted the frame once a week without comment. Kaya's room. The one with the mural of birds that Amara had painted on the wall the month before the accident. A hummingbird in the center, bright green with a thread of gold. "You didn't sleep," Connie said. "There's a woman on the cleaning crew at the office. Night shift. Her name is Sable Fontaine." Connie did not sit down. She leaned against the counter with her arms crossed, which was the posture she used when she was listening to something she already knew was going to be complicated. "I grew up with her, in Sudbury. Before my mother moved us. I was 13. She was 14. He stopped. She has bruises, Connie, kind that come from hands. And she's pregnant. How do you know that?" "Because you would not be sitting in this kitchen telling me about a woman from Sudbury at 7 in the morning unless there was something about her that you could not look away from, and a pregnant woman with bruises is not a thing a man who lost a child can look away from." Declan turned the coffee cup in his hands without drinking from it. "What are you going to do?" Connie asked. "I'm going to call the cleaning company. I'm going to have her reassigned to this house. 3 nights a week, at double the rate. I'll tell them it's a client preference." Connie's expression did not change, but her arms uncrossed by an inch. "You understand," she said, "that a woman who has been hurt does not trust a man who offers her something she didn't ask for. I know. You understand that to her you are a stranger in an expensive house, and strangers in expensive houses are the second most dangerous thing in her world right now. I know that too. So you move slow. You don't say her name. You don't tell her you know her. You let her think it's the company being generous, and you let her keep whatever dignity that man hasn't taken from her yet. You owe her that lie until she's ready for the truth. I owe her more than that." Connie picked up the coffee pot and refilled his cup even though he had not touched it. "Then start with the lie," she said, "and earn the rest." She was at the door when he spoke again. "Connie," she turned. "Ford, when I was 13, the last day before we left Sudbury, I sat on her grandmother's porch and I told her I'd come back for her. I told her no matter what happened, I'd find her again." He looked at the cup. "I was 13 years old and I meant every word, and then your mother packed the car. And then my mother packed the car." Connie nodded once, the slow nod she used when she was filing something away in a place she would not forget. "Well," she said, "your mother isn't packing anything now?" She closed the kitchen door behind her. Declan called the cleaning company at 8 sharp. He did not request, he instructed. By 9, Sable Fontaine had 30 guaranteed hours a week at a private residence in Forest Hill at a rate that would cover first and last on a decent apartment inside of 6 weeks. And somewhere in a dispatch office on the east end of the city, a clipboard was being updated with a note that read, "Client request, no substitution, no questions." He went upstairs. At the top of the landing, he stopped at the door he had not opened in 3 years. Kaya's name was still on the door in the wooden block letters Amara had bought at a craft fair in Kensington Market. The K was slightly crooked. It had always been slightly crooked. Amara had said it gave the name character. Declan put his palm flat against the wood. He did not turn the handle. He had not earned that yet. But he stood there longer than he had in 3 years, and when he walked away, the feeling in his chest was different. Not lighter, but aimed at something. The first 2 weeks, Sable Fontaine spoke to him in sentences no longer than 4 words. She arrived Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings at 8, let herself in through the side entrance with the code the company had given her, tied a clean apron over her stomach, and worked without a sound. She kept her eyes on whatever surface she was cleaning. She moved through the house with the careful footsteps of a woman who had been told more than once that her presence was too loud. Declan stayed in his study on those nights with the door open 6 inches, a habit Connie had suggested so that Sable would know where he was without having to wonder. He listened to the rhythm of her work the way a man who has lived alone for a long time listens to any sign that the house is not empty. When she needed something, she stood 3 paces from his doorway and addressed him by his surname. "Mr. Osei, the vacuum bag is full. There's a spare in the hall closet. Help yourself." "Yes, Mr. Osei." He told her on the 3rd night, in the lightest voice he could manage, that she could call him Declan. She did not use the name. Connie, without being asked, began arriving an hour before Sable's shifts. She left a plate of food on the kitchen island each time, covered with a cloth, and went about her business as if the plate had materialized on its own. The first night, Sable looked at the plate, then at Connie. "Ma'am." "I'm not allowed to." "Connie." "Not ma'am, and I didn't ask you a question." The plate was empty by 10. The cloth was folded into a neat square beside the sink. Connie reported this to Declan the next morning over coffee in the breakfast room with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had won a battle she had not announced. She ate. She ate. And she folded the cloth. She folded the cloth. Something in Declan's shoulders released by a fraction, and Connie saw it, and neither of them said anything more about it. Troned. The 3rd week, on a Wednesday, the temperature dropped to -14, and Sable arrived at the side entrance, in a jacket that had been adequate for October and was not adequate for November in Toronto. Connie took one look at her, walked her into the laundry room, handed her a heavy wool cardigan from the guest closet, and closed the door without discussion. Kane. When Sable came out, she was wearing a sweater that had not belonged to anyone in this house in 3 years. And her shoulders had the uncertain posture of a woman who could not remember the last time someone had made her warmer instead of colder. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her own thin jacket folded over her arm and said very quietly, "Thank you." It was the first sentence she had spoken in 3 weeks that was not in the manual. Declan, who was at the kitchen island with a glass of water and a stack of contracts, did not look up. He had learned by then that looking up was the wrong move. "Connie's been trying to get rid of that sweater for a year," he said to the page in front of him. "You'd be doing her a favor if you kept it." "I couldn't." "Then borrow it. Bring it back next Wednesday if it makes you feel better." A long beat of silence. Then, very softly, "All right." She did not bring it back the next Wednesday. He did not mention it. Connie, when she noticed, gave him a look across the kitchen that said good. The 4th week, Connie began the conversations. She did them sideways, the only way Connie did anything. She would be sorting utensils in the drawer while Sable wiped down the counters, and she would say something into the air, the way a woman talks to herself, and Sable would not have to answer if she did not want to. "This man has been in this house 3 years, Connie said one Friday, polishing a spoon. 3 years, and he has not had a single person sit down at this table with him for a meal that wasn't me. 3 years. Sable did not stop wiping, but the rhythm slowed. "My mother used to say a house holds whatever you put inside it," Connie continued. "You stop putting things in, the house gets hungry, starts feeding on you instead." She set the spoon in the drawer. "This house has been hungry for a long time." The wiping stopped. "My employer," Sable said carefully, "lost his family, his wife and his little girl, 3 years ago." "How?" "The 401, black ice, a transport truck." Connie closed the drawer. "He won't tell you that himself. So I'm telling you, because I think you should know who you're working for." Sable said nothing for a long while. When she went back to wiping, her hand moved slower, and the line of her shoulders was different. Table. That night Declan, walking back from his study to the kitchen for the glass of water he never seemed to actually drink, found her standing in the front hallway in front of the console table. She had stopped to look at the photograph he kept there, the only one he had not put away. Amara and Kaya at Center Island on a Saturday afternoon. Kaya on Amara's hip, pointing at a swan with the absolute conviction that the swan needed to hear what she had to say. Sable was crying, not loudly, the kind of crying that has learned to keep itself small. She heard his step and tried to wipe her face, and Declan, who had spent 3 years not having this conversation with anyone, said the thing he had not said aloud since the funeral. 1,109 days. I count them sometimes. I don't know why. She turned. Her eyes were wet, and her hand was still on the edge of the console, as though she needed the wood to hold her up. "Mr. Osei, Declan." It was the first time she had said it. Something behind his sternum shifted, and he did not let her see it. "Connie told me," Sable said. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have stopped to look. I know better. You can look. It's a photograph. That's what they're for." She made a small sound that was trying to be a laugh, but was not one yet. How old was she? 3 years and 2 months. What was her name? Kaya. Sable's hand, the one with the bruises that had begun to yellow at the edges, drifted down from the table and rested on the swell of her stomach. It was not a deliberate gesture. It was the instinct of a woman who had just heard a child's name and could not help herself. He saw it. She saw him see it. For a moment, they were two people in a hallway, and the hallway was not a workplace. She closed the distance between them and put her hand on his forearm the way a friend does, the way a person does when they have decided, for one breath, to be human instead of professional. Her fingers were cold from the cleaning water. Her wrist against his cuff still carried its fading shadow. She looked at his face, not at the floor. At his face. The hallway light was behind him, and she had been working in this house for 5 weeks, and something about the angle or the shadow of his jaw or the way he stood absolutely still, so as not to frighten her, made the recognition arrive all at once. Her hand tightened on his arm by a degree. Her mouth shaped a word, and what came out was barely sound. "Declan? Yeah, Declan Osei? Street? Yeah, the hummingbird, yeah." Her face did the thing a face does when 26 years arrive in a single breath. There was no scream. She put her other hand over her mouth and stood in his hallway and shook her head at a thing she had stopped believing in. "You promised me." She set it into her own palm. "You sat on my grandmother's porch and you told me you'd come back." "I know, and then you were gone." "I called the number you left," a stranger answered. "We moved to Hamilton. Nobody forwarded anything. I waited, Declan. I waited for months. I know it now." She was crying again, a different kind of crying, the crying of a woman who had decided at some point in the last 26 years to stop expecting anyone to show up. He did not move toward her, because Connie had told him not to, and because he had told himself not to, but he put his hand over hers where it rested on his forearm. Enough that she would know he was there. That was the night the house stopped being a monument and started being a house. For 3 weeks after that, things were quiet in the way good things are quiet. Connie began cooking on Sable's nights, whether she had been asked to or not. The three of them ate at the kitchen island, never the dining room, because the dining room had a chair Amara used to sit in, and Declan had not earned that room yet. Cable. Sable sat on the stool with her back to the window because Connie, without saying a word about it, had decided that no one was going to be looking through that window at Sable. Sable told them what she was willing to tell, and she told it in pieces. She had married a man named Warren Langford 6 years ago at a church in Hamilton. He came from a family that owned a chain of car dealerships across southwestern Ontario. The Langfords had a city councillor in the family, and a cousin who sat on a hospital board, and a long institutional memory for protecting their name. Sable had left Warren 9 weeks ago, after the second visit to an emergency room, with $40 and the clothes she could carry, and she had not told her mother where she was because her mother had grown up in the same neighborhood as the Langfords and would have driven her back herself. The baby was a boy. She had chosen the name already and was not telling anyone yet because the name was hers, and she was going to keep that one piece for herself until the child was in the room. Declan did not press. He had spent 3 years guarding his own silences, and he knew the shape of a person's quiet when they had earned it. He did one thing. The Friday after Sable said the name Langford in his kitchen, he picked up the phone and called a woman named Chioma Ikweme. Chioma had been his roommate's girlfriend at Western a lifetime ago and was now a partner at a family law firm on University Avenue whose name was on the letterhead. Declan told her what he could without using Sable's name. Chioma listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, and at the end she asked 2 questions. "Is she ready to file?" "Not yet." "Soon." "Has he found her?" Not yet. Maybe. Get me a meeting when she's ready. And Declan, if his family runs dealerships in the Southwest, I need to know which judge sits on whatever bench he ends up in front of, because the Langford name is on a lot of donation plaques in that part of the province, and judges notice donation plaques. Understood. One more thing. Cameras. Driveway, side gate, every exit. You probably have them already, but turn them on and start saving footage for 90 days. Do you hear me? I hear you, he called the security company that afternoon. The technician came Saturday morning. The first time Declan saw Warren Langford was on a Tuesday at 11 in the morning in the lobby of his own building on Bay Street. Warren came in wearing a navy suit that fit him well and a wedding ring on his left hand, and he gave his name at reception as Mr. Langford and asked to speak with Mr. Osei on a private matter regarding his wife, Hune. Declan took the meeting a glass-walled conference room with the door closed and the blinds open because he wanted it on camera and because he wanted Warren to know it was on camera. Warren Langford was a good-looking man in the particular way that a certain kind of dangerous man is good-looking. He had a firm handshake. He sat without being invited. He waited for Declan to speak first, which was a small and deliberate move. Mr. Osei, I appreciate you making time. I'll be brief. He set a folded sheet of paper on the table. He did not push it across. I understand my wife has been working at your residence through a cleaning service. I have a contract with that company. They assign people where they assign them. Of course. I'm not here about the cleaning company. I'm here as a husband. He smiled, and the smile did not reach his eyes, but it was the kind of smile that would read as reasonable on a security recording. Sable has been going through a difficult time. She has a history of anxiety. She left our home under a misunderstanding. Our family is simply concerned for her well-being. Your family, my mother, my brother, our pastor. We would like to know she's safe. He gestured at the paper. That's the contact information for our family lawyer and her physician. If you could pass along that we're ready to welcome her home, I'd consider it a personal kindness. Declan looked at the paper. He did not pick it up. Mr. Langford, Warren, please. Mr. Langford, I employ a cleaning service. I don't pass messages. Of course, I'm not asking you to pass a message. I'm asking, man to man, as someone who understands family. She's carrying my child. Whatever has happened between us, that child belongs with his family, and families take care of their own. The pen in Declan's hand had stopped moving on the legal pad in front of him. He looked down at what he had written without thinking. The word no 3 times, in steady block letters. He closed the pad. Mr. Langford, I'm going to ask you to leave my building. I'm going to ask you not to come back. If you'd like to communicate with me further, you can do so through my lawyer. Her name is Kioma Equim. I'll have her card sent to the lobby before you reach the elevator. The smile held. That's your right, Mr. Osei. It is. I hope you understand the kind of situation you're inserting yourself into. I understand it clearly. Warren stood, and at the door he turned and said the sentence that Declan would think about for the rest of the week. My wife belongs to me, Mr. Osei, whether she's in your kitchen or anyone else's. I'm only asking once. Next time, I won't be the one asking. He left the paper on the table. Declan did not touch it. That evening, Declan told Sable in the kitchen, in front of Connie, what had happened. He told her in plain words. He did not soften it. She heard him out without interrupting. When he finished, she sat on the stool with her hand on her stomach for a long time. He's already positioning, she said. That meeting wasn't for you. It was for whoever watches the tape later. So when his lawyer says unstable wife and a concerned husband acting in good faith, it sounds true to a judge. Chioma is already on it. Declan. She looked up at him, and there was a fear in her face that had not been there in 7 weeks. You lost a wife and a daughter. You do not get to lose anything else because of me. I'll find a shelter. I have a cousin in Thunder Bay. I should never have. Stop. I should never have let you put me on a payroll. I should never have let Connie feed me. I should never have. Sable, stop. You promised me when you were 13. You didn't promise me as a grown man. You don't owe me a courtroom. I owe you the difference between the two. Connie at the stove did not turn around. She kept stirring the pot in front of her, the steady stir of a woman making sure nobody in the room had to look anyone in the eye until they were ready. Sable said she had to leave. She said it for 8 days. Declan, to his credit, did not argue. He walked beside the conversation the way Connie had told him to walk, and he asked her one question every night. Where exactly are you going? She did not have a good answer on Monday. She did not have one on Wednesday. By Friday, she had circled 3 cities on a map and researched 2 shelters. And Declan, who had known she would, had spent his afternoons on the phone with Kioma and the security company, and a second lawyer Kioma had recommended for the criminal side. On the 9th day, Kioma called Declan at home. I filed for the restraining order this morning. The answer came back fast, and it came back the way I was afraid it would. Tell me. Denied. Insufficient evidence. The hospital records from Hamilton were incomplete. The photographs were time-stamped wrong by the intake nurse, and the justice of the peace on the docket today is a man whose firm has handled real estate closings for Langford Motors for the past decade. We can refile. We will refile, but not this week. Declan closed his eyes. Thank you. Kioma, hear me. He knows now. He knows why I tried. A man like that, cornered with money and a name, does not act smart. He acts angry. Get her somewhere safe tonight and turn those cameras to 24-hour live monitoring. I'm sending you the link. Declan went down to the kitchen where Sable was wiping the same section of counter she had wiped 10 minutes ago. He told her, in front of Connie, that the restraining order had been denied. Sable set down the rag. Put. She walked to the side door of the mudroom and stood with her forehead against the wood and her hand on her stomach. And she did not say anything at all. Declan did not move toward her. Connie behind them kept stirring. That night, after Sable had gone back to the rooming house on Dundas because she had refused the guest room, and after Connie had locked the side door and tested the front gate and gone to her own quarters, Declan walked out onto the back deck alone with a cup of coffee he did not drink. The motion light on the south side of the property kicked on. Declan turned. Nothing. Just the hedge and the frost on the lawn and the empty driveway. Then, on the bottom step of the deck, where there had been nothing an hour before, he saw it. A small box. Inside, a dried corsage, the kind from a prom, brittle and faded. A folded card tucked under the ribbon. The handwriting said 4 words. Come home, Sable. Please. Declan stood on the deck in the cold for a long time. Then he called Connie first, and the rooming house on Dundas second, and the security company third. It was late November. An Alberta clipper had been tracking across the Great Lakes all day, and Environment Canada had issued a winter storm warning for the GTA before sunset. The wind was already pushing snow sideways across the 401. 2 on-ramps had closed before midnight. Sable did not answer the first call. She picked up the second, and Declan heard in her voice the thing he had been afraid of. Connie had called her first. Connie had not mentioned the corsage. Connie had only told her to put on her coat and wait by the front door because someone was coming, and the someone was already in the car. Declan drove with both hands on the wheel and the wipers fighting snow, and Kioma on speakerphone, going through what a man like Warren Langford does in the 72 hours after the courts refuse him. The list was not a comfortable list. Declan stopped listening to it about 2 kilometers from Dundas. She was in the front hall of the rooming house when he arrived, with a single duffel bag at her feet, and Connie on the phone in her ear, and one hand resting on her stomach in a way that was not casual. It was the hand of a woman who had been counting something for the last half hour and had not decided whether to mention it. He picked up the duffel. He walked her to the passenger side with one hand at the small of her back and closed the door the way Amara had once told him a man closes a door for a woman who has had a long day. Halfway down the Gardner, she made a small sound she did not mean to make, and her hand tightened on the dashboard. Sable? It's nothing. I'm fine. Sable. It's been happening since this afternoon. I thought it was stress. I thought. Her breath caught, and she rode through it the way a woman rides through it when she has been alone with her body for too long. I think he's coming, Declan. How far apart? 6 minutes. maybe 5. The snow was blinding now, a wall of white the wipers could barely fight. The radio cut in with an Environment Canada alert. Winter storm warning, Greater Toronto Area. Multiple road closures. Avoid non-essential travel. Declan took the next exit. He called Connie without taking his eyes off the road and told her to meet them at the house, not the hospital. Because Mount Sinai was 40 minutes through roads that were already impassable, and Sunnybrook was 40 minutes in the other direction on a worse route. Connie said, "Then you bring her home." Home was 18 minutes away on a clear night. It took 34, coned. By the time Declan pulled through the front gate, the contractions were 3 minutes apart, and Connie was standing in the foyer with the landline pressed to her ear and a stack of clean towels over her arm. Owned. The voice on the other end belonged to a labor and delivery nurse named Patricia Achibi at Sunnybrook, a friend from Connie's church choir who had stayed on the line as soon as Connie called, and who would stay on it for as long as it took the storm to break, or the ambulance to get through, whichever came first. They put Sable in the downstairs guest room because the stairs were not something she was going to do. Connie closed the curtains. Declan, on instructions from the nurse on the line, washed his hands twice to the elbow and a third time when she told him to. He had not been in a delivery room since Kaya. He had told the obstetrician at the time that he wanted to see his daughter the second she arrived, and the memory of that single second had been one of the things he had locked behind a door on the upstairs landing for 3 years. He was not behind that door anymore. Sable's eyes between contractions found his face. She had her hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers hard enough to leave marks, and the marks she was making did not look like the marks Warren had made, because these were the marks a woman makes on purpose on a person she has decided to hold on to. "Declan, I'm here, listen to me. Listen, if something happens to me, Sable. If something happens to me, you don't close that door upstairs again. You hear me? You opened it tonight. You don't get to shut it. You've been hiding in this house long enough. Nothing is going to happen to you. Promise me, Sable. You owe me one promise you keep in the same lifetime you make it. Promise me." He did not say, "I promise." He said the truer version, the one he had not said to anyone in 3 years. "I will not close that door." She closed her eyes and the next contraction came, and Patricia Achibi at Sunnybrook said, calm and clear from the speakers on the nightstand, "All right, sweetheart. On this next one, you push." The baby came at 4:10 in the morning. He came red and furious and entirely whole, with a head of dark hair and a cry that was impossibly loud for something so small. Connie caught him in a clean towel because Declan's hands were occupied, one beneath Sable's shoulders to keep her propped, the other gripped tight in hers. He had not planned that. His body had decided. Sable was crying with her eyes still closed. "Tell me he's okay. He is so okay, Sable. He is so okay. Tell me his name. I want to hear someone else say it first." "You haven't told me his name, Miles. After my grandfather, Miles." He said it into the room like a thing that had been waiting to exist. "Welcome." The snow was still falling. The motion light on the south side of the property had kicked on twice in the last hour and reset itself. Declan did not know it yet. He found out when his phone on the dresser in the next room lit up with a notification from the security company at 4:36 in the morning. Warren Langford had not been smart. He came up the driveway in his own SUV on his own plates in clear view of the camera Declan had installed on Chioma's recommendation. He did not bring a weapon because he was the kind of man who believed his name did the work of a weapon. Came to the side door of the mudroom, the one Sable had used 3 nights a week for 2 months, and he tried the handle, and when it did not turn, he hit the door with the flat of his hand and said her name twice, loud enough that the camera microphone caught it cleanly. Declan opened the door himself. Connie had taken Miles into the guest room with Sable and closed the door. The 911 call had been placed 11 minutes earlier. The Toronto police cruiser was, according to the dispatcher, 5 minutes out. Declan stood on his own threshold in a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled past the elbow and a streak of red on the cuff from the towel he had pressed against Sable's leg an hour before. He looked at Warren Langford, who was wet with snow and breathing hard, and who had clearly expected someone smaller and quieter to be answering this door. "Where is my wife?" Mr. Langford stepped back from the door. "Where is my wife, Osei?" "You are on a private residence at 4 in the morning. There is a camera 2 meters above your head and a patrol car on its way, and there is a recording of every word you've said in the last 90 seconds. I am asking you once, calmly, to step back. You think a camera frightens me? I think a judge will." Warren took a step forward instead of back, and Declan did not move because the doorway was narrow. And behind the doorway was Connie, and behind Connie was Sable. And behind Sable was a child who was 26 minutes old and whose name was Miles. There are thresholds a man does not step away from. Declan had spent 3 years stepping away from one upstairs. He was not doing it tonight. "My wife is in there with my son." "You don't get to. She is not your wife. The papers were filed 9 days ago. You've been served, and the child in this house tonight is not yours in any way a court is going to recognize after the footage I'm about to send my lawyer." The first set of headlights came up the driveway. Then the second. Warren turned, and what he saw on the faces of the 2 officers stepping out of the first cruiser was not what his family's connections had taught him to expect. He was on the frozen gravel of the driveway in handcuffs 4 minutes later. Trespassing on a posted private property. Criminal mischief for the broken latch on the side gate. Violation of the interim no-contact directive that Keoma had filed as a temporary measure the same afternoon the restraining order was denied. The directive had not been a full order, but it had been enough, and the camera footage from the driveway and the side door and the motion sensor had been more than enough. Sable came out of the guest room with Miles in her arms before they put Warren in the cruiser. Connie tried to stop her gently with a hand on her shoulder. Sable shook her head. "He needs to see him. Once, so he knows." She walked slowly across her own living room and onto the front steps in a borrowed robe of Connie's, the baby wrapped in a clean white towel against her chest. The snow had thinned to a few drifting flakes. The officer, sensing without being told that something was happening that did not require his interruption, took a half step back. Sable stopped on the second step. Warren, in cuffs in the open rear door of the cruiser, looked up. She did not raise her voice. "You do not own me, Warren. You never owned me. And this child does not belong to you. He belongs to me. That is the only thing I am ever going to say to you again." Warren opened his mouth. The officer closed the door before anyone had to hear it. The cruiser pulled down the driveway past the broken gate and was gone. Sable turned and walked back inside. Declan closed the door behind her. Connie was already in the kitchen putting the kettle on for tea that nobody had asked for, because Connie had learned somewhere in 64 years that there are nights when a kettle is the most useful thing in the world. 7 months later, the door at the top of the upstairs landing was open. The room behind it had been repainted a soft blue because Sable had asked Declan in her careful way whether he was sure, and Declan had said yes, and driven to the hardware store himself. The birds on the wall, the mural Amara had painted, were still there. Declan had not painted over them. He had simply asked Sable whether she would mind if one more was added, and Sable, who had understood exactly what he was asking, had taken a fine brush and painted a small hummingbird beside Amara's flock. Bright green with a thread of gold. Kaya's name was still on the door in the wooden block letters. The K was still crooked. Below it, in a steady hand, a second name had been added, Miles. Criminal case against Warren Langford was in its 4th hearing. Keoma had 2 associates on it now. The Langford family had retained the sort of lawyers who arrived in bespoke suits and gave speeches about context, but the camera footage from the side door at 4 in the morning was not something context had a good answer for. The restraining order, refiled in front of a different justice, had been granted on the first hearing. On a Saturday morning in early June, Declan stood on the back deck with Miles on his shoulder. The boy was old enough now to grab a fistful of shirt collar and hold on as if he had decided Declan was a thing he owned. Sable came out behind him with 2 mugs of coffee, handed him one without speaking, and stood beside him in the kind of silence that does not need to be filled. He looked at the small tattoo behind her left ear. The hummingbird. It had not gone anywhere in 26 years, and it was not going anywhere now. "You ever think about it?" he said. "Spruce Street? Every day." "Me too." Connie's voice came from the kitchen, warm and dry and impatient. "You two are going to drink that coffee cold if you keep standing out there, being sentimental. Get inside." "Breakfast?" Sable smiled, and the smile reached her eyes the way smiles do when a person has finally, all the way through, after a very long time, come home. Declan held the door open with his foot, and the 3 of them, 4 counting Miles, went inside together. "You know, I think about Declan's promise sometimes. 13 years old on a porch in Sudbury, telling a girl with a hummingbird on a napkin that he would come back for her. He could not have known he had 26 years to wait. None of us ever do. So before you go, I want to ask you something, and I do read the answers. Who is the person in your life who kept a promise you had given up on? Or maybe it is the other way around. Maybe there is somebody you owe a promise to, and you have been waiting for the right moment, and the moment keeps not coming. Tell me about them in the comments. I read everyone I can get to. If this story sat with you tonight the way some stories do, go ahead and hit that like button so the channel can find more people who need to hear it. And if you want to stay for the next one, the subscribe button is right there, and it is free, and it costs you nothing but a tap. I will see you there. Take care of yourself out there. Take care of the people who showed up for you. And if you can be Declan for somebody this week, even in a small way, be Declan.